our main topic this week here on Mastering Dungeons, we are going to talk about designing a starting RPG adventure. So last week we created a village because it takes a village, Teos. It takes a village.
So I hear.
Um, and so now that we've done that, we want to create a starting adventure. We are going to, for the sake of this particular discussion, go with the premise that you, as the DM, know the rules. You know, you've run before, you are just getting ready to start a new campaign. You've created the starting village. So here we go. And we are going to assume that the players at your table also know the game. So this will not need to teach you, the DM, or you will not need to teach the players how to play the game. So everyone's starting with an understanding of at least the rules, if not, you know, a really firm understanding of everything. So let's talk about the starting adventure. First, you want to follow on from everything that you've done with your village. The village you've designed has been designed a particular way for a particular reason. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, go back and listen to last week's podcast and then jump forward to this one. Uh, so the village will tell you some things about how you're going to start. But let's talk about this first adventure. The first question is, Teos, what?
Well, did you have a session zero? That's the most important part before you just jump into that first session. Got to lay the groundwork.
That's right. And we've talked about session zeros before here, going all the way back when we were differently named and when we've had different hosts. So you can also go back and read any blog or story or whatever on session zeros.
Yeah, but just if I can jump in here,
Yeah.
we've talked about this before, but session zeros in the particularly around this how you're going to start.
Mhm.
You want to know whether the things you're going to dish out are things that the players are looking for, right? So if this is a deep
Yeah.
intrigue, houses against each other, politics, diplomacy, Game of Thrones type thing, you kind of want to know whether the players want that because they may go,
Yeah.
actually, I hate that stuff, right? Or if you're going to do a
Mhm.
live off the land and sometimes running out of food and track your water gallons, you also want to know whether your players are in for that and everything in between, right? So that understanding of that what I'm going to serve up is what
Mhm.
they like. Well, right there, that's a giant win that you're aware that these are within the parameters they're looking for, or even things like the challenge level, right? The level of role
Mhm.
playing, those kinds of things, really
Right.
helpful as a starting premise.
Yeah. And so that is one issue that people have when they hear session zero. Some people just think it's character creation. That's not what session zero is. You're talking about the personal side of things,
Yeah.
the scheduling side of things, the social side of things, the safety tools sorts of things, campaign expectations, etc.
Yeah.
And then maybe you are also talking about the characters you're going to play. And if you make them now, if you make them on your own, if you make them together as a group, that stuff can go in. So in that session zero, I would ask, did you make the connections between the characters? Are these characters already a group that know each other? Are they individuals who will come together during the adventure, or are they individuals who may know each other partially or may have a connection that
Yeah.
they don't even know about yet? All of these questions will need to be answered before you begin to design this adventure. If you have not made those connections yet, uh, maybe it's because you have a good reason not to. Uh, do you not want to have them meet because you want them to meet in a surprising way, in a way that adds depth to the story that you're going to be telling with them?
You all have a
That's
role on
okay.
the caravan to Icewind Dale, right? And so
Exactly.
that job that you have will play out over time. And therefore, you want them to not know each other, but just show up and then band together over time.
Mhm. And that's fine. You can find a way to make that fun and you can
Mm-hmm.
find a way to make that work. Oftentimes, though, the the oomph to that, the power of that is left up to how well the characters and the players can do it. And so you may not connect them because you want them to connect totally during play, and it often falls flat.
Mhm.
It may not get to the point where you are getting a deeper story or deeper meanings or a better connection because you waited to do so during play.
Yeah.
So you may just want to do it during the session zero and say, you know her for this reason, and you don't know anyone yet, but you will. But you are three that have shared caravan duty before.
Right.
Um, and you then it helps them role play and it helps you build the world and build the story that's coming.
Yep, absolutely. And it's surprising, but it really what it is that there's often a high friction point when you're supposed to pretend you don't know each other and that you
Mhm.
aren't the characters at the table. And so overcoming
Right.
that can be a little difficult unless you kind of quickly pull everybody together in some way that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. And there are ways I've seen it done that are great, but
Hmm.
that would be a different show.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's very intricate, and it even the best plan can go wrong with the wrong kind of player. Not the wrong kind of player, but just a play style that doesn't match
Hmm.
that. All right. So if you didn't bring the characters together, now's the time that you have to do that because they're all going to be sitting at the table.
Hmm.
Uh, so now's the time to bring them together. Why? Because in my experience, games are deeper and more fulfilling when the characters have a reason to role play with each other. It doesn't have to be an elaborate backstory, but if there is some connection between the two, it gives some grist for that mill to have the players talk to each other. Why is it great to have them talk to each other? Because it gives you, the game master, a second to rest and think, and it gives you some fodder to bring into the story in ways that help everybody tell a better story.
Yeah.
When oh, I wanted to mention Fiasco. We're covering Fiasco in class, and that is a great game for establishing these relationships and then building up on them to tell a story. And in that game, you have a relationship with at least one other character, or two other characters, regardless of how many players are playing. And then you have like an object or a need, what's the last one, or a location that binds you together. And so just that one thing, right? Just that there's a coin collection that's between
Right.
us. And then you can decide what that means. But just that one connection can lead to so much fun and a really deep story if you use them
Yeah.
well. So just make some connection, even if it's later revealed to be a connection. Uh, make something there that they have to play off of between each other.
Absolutely.
So when do you bring them together? As soon as possible. You can make it gradual as long as that connection progresses in a promising way. So you don't need to sit down and say, all right, you are their cousin. And you don't have to do that, but hint at a connection and then constantly be moving toward it. Hey, don't I know you? Haven't I seen you before somewhere? I don't know. You do seem familiar. And then you go forward, and it slowly reveals what that connection is.
Yeah, and it, like we talked about the Blade Runner adventure, right? When we reviewed that, the box set adventure does this interesting thing where it starts with two characters, with one of them saying, "Hey, you've got to come in, you grumpy Blade Runner, you." And I'm the robot Blade Runner that is, bringing you in because I play by the rules, and just lets them kind of chat. and
Sure.
and I've it's fine. It works perfectly fine in play when I've run it and when I've played it. But it's like it's just sort of a strange thing that two players get to do together. And then everybody goes to a meeting and the rest of the people are there. And more interesting would be if you had three introductory scenes that had some reason why it was important to those particular characters. That could actually showcase their connections, showcase
Mhm.
what they do, and then bring them all together in the very next scene. that could be a really fun way to do it too, right? Because it would play off of build upon all of those differences and kind of tell those particular stories. Um, but yeah, how you come up with that? I mean, you could rack your brain forever, but it's worth giving it the thought
Mhm.
um, of what you're going to do to bring players together and give them the reason to dig into their backstories and their connections.
Mhm. And so the big question is then how? How do you bring them together? The most powerful way is a pre-existing relationship. It doesn't have to, as I said before, be a 20-page backstory, but it could just be you were both from the same guild, you were both from the same orphanages, uh, y- anything that just gives that slightest connection that can be built upon. Um, any connection. At the very least, though, you want to provide them with goals that allow them to work together and don't put the characters at odds in ways that would make them want to kill each other.
Mhm. Yeah.
So get them moving toward the same goal. If later on there is a conflict, I want to take the item and give it to the church. You want to take the item and give it to the king. That's one thing. But don't start with any sort of conflict because
Yeah.
you can derail the whole campaign before it even starts by doing that. Get everybody moving on the same train in the same direction with the same or at least similar goals to smooth the skids uh,
Yeah.
to get them going that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And this all reminds me of when we were starting the Ashes of Athas campaign, and we were thinking about how in Dark Sun there's often this sort of like we're all not great people or less than in a typical campaign, and therefore we
Mhm,
might fight each other, right, or be
mhm,
opposed to one another. Because it's a world of gladiatorial pits and things like that. And so it was a concern that the players might approach it with like, I'm this kind of character and I'm going to be against you. I'm nefarious, whatever. And Chris Sims, who was helping us at the start of the campaign, said, you know what? What you've got to do is kind of give them a solid punch that unites them all together, right? Put
mhm,
some blood in their mouth and a reason to all have skin in the game and working as a group. And he said, let's make them all members of the Veiled Alliance and have the Veiled Alliance attack. So
mhm,
they all have a group. They've all been under duress and they band together to overcome it. And that starts everybody off on the right foot, right? With a
mhm.
goal, a purpose, a bond. And it was brilliant. We were just like,
Oh yeah.
clap, clap. Yes, Chris, we will do what you say. That's amazing. And it
And
worked great.
that, now that you mention it, that was one of the most powerful openings to a campaign that I can remember. For exactly for that reason, right?
Hats off to
It
Chris.
was
Yeah.
who are we? Who are we? Wait a second, our world is collapsing around us,
Yeah.
and we only have each other to rely on.
Yeah. And it so it took it answered with one start all the problems, all the potential problems we're looking at kind of thematically around the campaign and how to get players excited to do stuff together. And that lasted through the campaign because it was such a strong start and motivating story of the remnants of the Veiled Alliance and trying to figure out who did this to you and why and all that. It was great.
Sure. All right. So now that we are figuring out this connection between the characters, we need to figure out if we're going to start like with a bang or are we going to ease into the action? And how you do it will depend on the purpose and the content. So, in any sort of exploration, and it doesn't even have to be games, right? But in any sort of story where you're moving forward, you want to start with the known. You want people to be on solid footing and then move off into the unknown. So, if your setting is known, if the players understand that okay, this is a medieval fantasy, or even if it's science fiction, as long as you know that the type of play is going to be familiar and the setting is known, you've established the basics in your session zero, then you can assume that the players are firmly in the known, and you can start with a bang. You can start in
Mhm.
media race. You can just jump forward and hit them with action right away. if you're starting the campaign in a place where it might be unfamiliar to the players, you're going to use a different setting where the rules are slightly different, or the setting has some weird qualities to it that aren't in a regular setting. Then you might want to ease into it, give some role-playing opportunities, which will provide some exposition to help make the setting known before you hit them with something
Yeah.
unknown. That is a general rule of thumb that I try to use. What do you
Mhm.
think, Teos?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I mean, it makes me think of any kinds of like Wild Beyond the Witchlight, right? Like starting a little more slowly because it's like, hey, here's this face circus, and
Mhm,
maybe we're gonna walk around and take it in. And so you don't need that. If you started with a bang, there would be so many things to explain that would be a little confusing. And
mhm.
but then if you take something like Lost Mines, where you start with an ambush, that makes sense because it's caravan duty and guard duty, and even if you've never played D&D before, you can get the gist of where you
Yeah,
are and what's going on. Sure.
yeah. But if you do ease into it and start with exposition, you want to avoid the box text problem, right? You don't want to sit and read for 20 minutes about each individual god and what's in the town, right? You want to allow player interaction to drive that rather than a lore dump. You would rather have them asking questions of you rather than you telling them the answer to questions that they have not yet asked. There are some things where you can assume that this is important to know, right? It's the show don't tell.
Hmm.
Show if you can, but tell if you must, and get that information to them so you can then jump quickly into the unknown, which is where the game wants you to drive your characters
Yeah.
toward.
Yeah, and I think that that idea of starting with a bang is great. It's one of the things that Mike Shea talks about in his Lazy DM book, because it really just gets you right into the flow of D&D, right? Some quick encounter, something like that, some problem to solve, everybody immediately starts jumping into the game and having fun with that. If you don't do that, then you want to think about, well, why was this a great session of D&D, right? If this is the
Mhm.
start and this is going to be my first session or two, but especially thinking of that first session, if all of it were like speaking to merchants at a guild hall, while that may lay the groundwork for understanding the guild that will feature prominently in the campaign, it's not the most exciting D&D. So what will make this memorable, right? And I think of Chris Perkins gave an example once of you meet in a tavern and your employer to be this wizard comes in to give you the typical, here's the information. And as they start to do so, they suddenly get this strange look and then they keel over falling onto the table and there's a dagger sticking in their back. Suddenly things got exciting, right? So you can get
Right.
that build and then be like, oh, wait a minute, what are we all, now we're
Yeah.
on to what might feel like D&D, right, to people, and they can sink their
Yeah.
teeth into it. Where'd they go? Let's look for clues, right? That gets all that interest bit that you want, something exciting. And you'll see the same thing
Mhm.
in novels and TV, right? Like they'll give you some interesting build up, whatever, lay the foundation, and then something exciting is going to come along.
Yeah, and that leads to the next question, which are you going to provide a hook right away to get them started, or do they have to search for the hook? And generally, I would say provide the hook right away. Don't make them search for the hook. But giving the hook too soon can lead to tunnel vision if they need to know something else in order to play, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if they do need information in order to make decisions, you might not want to give them a hook right away. You don't want to say, right, you need to go off to the orc caves, the troll caves to do this. And then the players are completely focused on the troll cave and they don't take the time or don't even want to take the time to learn that, oh, by the way, the troll caves used to be the layer of this, which is an important part of what they're about to encounter. So be careful about giving the hook too soon. You want to give it as soon as you can, but think about what they might need to know, the players and the characters might need to know before you give them that hook.
Yeah, and or that it might even become a trail of hooks, where you go, well, the big hook
Mhm.
is I want to get to these caves, and that's going to be exciting that we're going off to the troll caves or the orc caves. But if you first want them to, interview the survivors of the caravan that went by the place and were attacked, then you want to first start with that something happened
Right,
to this caravan hook.
right.
Go talk to them, figure the things out, and they will tell you where the troll cave is. And sometimes if you play enough adventures, you will find these adventures that give you the things too soon. And that's something that's really important to
Mhm.
think of when you're doing your campaigns.
Yeah,
And if you do that, like, if you're a homebrew DM who kind of improvises, right, and just kind of throws in some bits and then plays off of that, well, that's fine too. If you mention a hook too early, you just need someone else to come in and set that straight and say, hey, I see you gearing up. Before you do that, I'll
yeah,
tell you what'll save your hide. You got to
yeah,
talk to the people who've been through this. Go talk
yeah,
to, so and so.
yeah. And it may seem a little awkward, but in the long run, you'll be forgiven
Yeah.
because we know it's a game and we know that
Yeah.
we need information to play. Right? As a story, if I was reviewing a novel, that I'd roll my eyes and say, "Oh boy," right? But it's a game; it's not a
It's a
novel,
game.
so therefore, and that the this novel talk reminds me of a teacher I had. He was a Canadian writer named Doug Glover, and he taught his students what he called the theory of globs,
Hmm.
which I think is an amazing thing. And this theory that Doug was like a mad scientist of a writer, and his thing was you're doing several things when you write a story, when you create a story, right? You're one phrase or sentence might be exposition where you're explaining a thing. One might be characterization where you're showing the reader who the character is. One might be moving action forward. One might be a flashback to describe something. And so there are many
Hmm.
purposes. And each of these little phrases, sentences, or even individual words sometimes has this purpose. So he calls those things globs. And you want to be able to do something like this. Name what that thing is, what glob is it fulfilling, and highlight it with a marker, with a highlighter. And when you're done highlighting your story, you want it to look like a rainbow.
Hmm.
You want, even within a sentence, to have different colors because you're doing different things and you're deepening the story. So rather than a flashback that goes on for 5 pages, that would be 5 pages of orange highlighter.
Mhm.
You're losing opportunities when you do that. You want this phrase to be orange and then this phrase to be pink and then this a phrase to be green. You're doing multiple things. And it's like that here, right? You want to not just move forward the entire time, encounter after. You want to take the time to intersperse in this exposition. You want to intersperse in some world building with the forward moving action. The more you can do that, the deeper and deeper. And you're right, this is like high level stuff.
Yeah,
This is like,
but it
yeah.
is really important. Like, when I think about Rime of the Frost Maiden, one of the
Mhm.
really kind of intriguing, fascinating, strange parts of the adventure is that it says to you, hey, welcome to the start of this adventure. You're not new to Icewind Dale. You're not new to the rhyme, but
Mhm.
that's the name of this adventure. And you, as the player, don't know anything about all this stuff.
Right.
Hey, go find Chewingas or go, on this other
Mhm.
quest. And that messes it up because
Right.
now you're not getting that dual purpose, right? And it's interesting
Right.
that the two Adventurers League intros that were written for that season, you wrote one, Paige Laitman wrote the other, I believe.
Mhm.
Um, those intros both have a sort of you are on a caravan aspect
Mhm.
dealing with this winter effect and the
Yep.
problems of it and working your way towards Icewind Dale while learning about what's happening.
Right.
that all those are these globs you're talking about serving multiple purposes, helping you feel like what you are, which is a new player to this setting, right? And your character
Mhm.
needs some ability to express that. Why am I asking questions? Why am I learning?
Right.
Wild Beyond Witchlight had this problem before. I've talked about this before, where it says one of you could be a member of the circus. Well, then you know
Yep.
everything.
Right.
How does that work, right? Like, if you're going to
Right.
know everything, how do you ask questions? As you know, you'd want to
Yep.
have answers, and you don't have the
Right.
answers. In fact, you'd almost want to skip all of it, and that doesn't make any sense,
Right.
right? And so,
Yeah.
having those, when we look at the start of an adventure, how can we do those dual things of getting you started, getting you to learn about the setting, getting you to understand and form relationships with whatever this home base is, and begin to tease out that story, right? You want all those things coming together, but not to the point where it confuses you. And
Mhm.
I think that's
Right.
the art of it, right? Like those globs, you don't want to do it in an overwhelming way where nobody can sort what's,
Yeah.
you want those things to be tangible, right? And like the examples that we gave of like the Rime of the Frostmaid thing, those intro adventures did a really good job of saying like, hey, you're a caravan person. That's your grounding, which doesn't require explanation, right? You've got
Right.
no questions. You know what's that. That's solid.
Yeah.
Now you start learning about the winter. Good. Now you start worrying about the types of threats that are working on and the questions people have. And now
Right.
something happens you must overcome. So you band together, right? Those give it to you all while there are multiple things happening. They're happening in a way that you can digest it all and keep it separate. You know what's background, you know what's setting and all that, and you know what's the
Right.
adventure.
Yeah. As you interact with the NPC who's giving you a quest, you're also learning that NPC is from Bryn Shander.
Yes.
And because they're wearing this fur or this embellishment, you learn either right out or through history check that this is why they wear this, and this is what it means about what Bryn Shander means to the 10 towns, and et cetera, et cetera. Uh, so you're still moving forward. You're still moving forward with the adventure, but you are learning, deepening the story,
Yeah.
deepening the world
Yeah.
as you move forward. Yeah. So let's talk for a second about adventure hooks. Uh, Adventure hooks are the way that the player and their character learn about the issue and are enticed into going forward. Uh, so you want to introduce the characters to the adventure they're playing, and you want to do so in a way that makes the player want to go on the adventure. Even if the character doesn't, uh, the player will still want to because surprisingly, they control the character. So, what are some ways to provide this hook? Right. One way is just plain old money, goods,
Yep.
cash, magic items, things that are valuable probably to the character. And most players are trying to level up, buy things, earn things, get magic items. So that's one way. That's a usually a pretty good way to entice most players and characters.
Sure.
The goodness of your heart, right? You are a good person and you don't want the world to end. So you are going to go on this mission.
Yeah.
That hooks probably less folks, but at least it is something that throughout most stories that we've learned, people do things because they want good to succeed in the world over evil.
Yeah, it's my favorite, and I don't know if this is you'd include this or not, but in general, just solving the problem, right? Like,
Mhm.
and I think that's why I dislike one of the reasons I dislike things like Rats in a Basement or Caravan Duty as its own thing is that
Mhm.
none of it is sort of captivating, and the goodness of it is like, well, I don't know, you're somehow still maintaining a working tavern with these rats in the basement. So sure, it's good that I get rid of them, but this is nothing heroic. This is nothing great, right? Now, if you say there are mysterious sounds in the basement, well, I might be disappointed as a player that they happen to be rats. That's your explanation, Mr. Adventure Writer. At least it's intriguing to the character. What's making the noises in the basement? When did these start? Right. And it's the idea of helping out, but it's that curiosity that's dovetailing into it, right? There is a death curse. Why? What's going on? How can we you start getting into problem solving mode.
Yeah. Uh, in-game rewards are also important, obviously, like experience points if you use that,
Mm,
or just the general storytelling things, if right, or mechanics. After you succeed at 4 encounters, you get a boon,
right.
or this or that, if depending on the game you're playing. uh, so that sort of thing. One the reason I bring this up is because over the years in organized play, there were so many different kinds of characters that I would end up writing 27 different adventure hooks to try to entice every kind. Oh, well, you're an evil-ish character. And money doesn't mean anything to you. So what might be another hook? And that's why the factions were so nice at the start of fifth edition. Um, because if everyone joined a faction, you could just say, all right, these 5 factions, here are 5 different reasons why this faction would want you to go on this mission. So I will make those.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And that sense of belonging and purpose is kind of cool too, right? When you're like, oh, my faction sent me here, right? That feels good. It feels like you're part of something, and that's also motivating, right?
Mhm.
Secrets might be revealed over time because of this group that I'm associated with. That's neat. The rules in Tasha's and Ebron for a patron are fantastic for that purpose. Or Ack Inc. having a franchise, right? This sense of belonging gives you that unstated, or really it's stated, the stated direction, the
Mhm.
overarching. You have a reason, you have an impetus, you have a thing that you're doing, right? If you've got some larger motivation, like we are maintaining the tavern that we all own, right? That's now important. We need these resources for this. That is a huge driver as well.
Yeah. And most importantly, especially if you're a player, if nothing in the adventure, if you feel like your character would not be hooked by anything that's presented, make up one. You become a storyteller as the game expects you to be,
Yeah.
and say, you know what, my character's not interested in money or being good, but this person, this merchant who who is asking us to go search for their lost caravan, they may have connections that I could use down the line. So I'm going to do it for that reason. Heck, my evil god has given me a vision that by helping this merchant, it will lead to more down the
Yeah.
road. So I'm going to do it, right? You have the agency to, even if the DM does not agree,
Right.
in your own mind, you have the agency to
Yeah.
create what your character would be thinking in order to get you on this adventure.
Yeah, and those can be so powerful over time, surprisingly so, when you decide to create your own motivating factor. It may feel like you're applying a band-aid. And I mean, in some ways, sure, stepping out, like it's sort of a band-aid because look, social contract. I'm here with a bunch of people to play a game. If I'm going to drag my feet and cause a problem, this will be no fun, right? Like,
Mhm.
you know, I don't want to, let's not go down to the basement where the probably it's just rats. Like, that's no fun, right? And
Mhm.
when you come up with that motivating factor, even one that seems like, yeah, totally at odds and secret, it could really be great. Like I had a ale cursed dwarf who could not taste ale unless he did something good, and he did not want to do good things, but he loved ale. So he
Right.
would begrudgingly go on every quest because it would suddenly give him a little bit of that taste, and it was so much fun. And that
Mhm.
became a funning running gag for everybody, right? Of as
Right.
why I was doing it. And of course, eventually the heart of gold gets revealed, and I end up being more in league with the characters because otherwise that would eventually be too big attention. So it makes more sense
Yeah.
for my character to over time become better, right? But that initial impetus was a great way that I could be
Yeah.
evilish, grumpy, whatever, but totally play along with what the rest of the party was doing.
And then as the game master who hears Teos do this, I'm going, this is perfect. Because now in my mind, I'm like, we have to have an adventure where the dwarf gets back his taste
Uh-huh.
and how, what will change.
Yeah.
And oh, I have an alchemist who promises to create a potion that will undo this. And you're right. So now
Yeah.
I have
Yeah.
adventures and I have hooks and I have all of these ways to make the
Yeah.
campaign deeper just because you invented something on your own.
Right. And your character will shine as a result of it and will fit into the group. And yeah, it's
Yeah.
great. Versus just being some curmudgeon at the table that makes things not fun.
Yeah. So the other thing I want to say about adventure hooks, and Teo sort of already mentioned this, but I think it bears repeating, is don't give away the whole game in the
Mm,
hook. You only need to get the character started on the trail. You don't need to reveal what's going on down the line. And it's generally better that way. Uh, so just give them enough information to get them to that first place where they're going to have an encounter, hear more clues, move forward. If you give away too much in the hook, and one of the problems I had with an adventure I ran this weekend was that's what happened, right?
mm,
The hook gave so much away that the players knew too much to be able to actually take on these encounters. They were 3 steps ahead of what the encounters were. So they could either ignore or bypass or right and
yeah.
otherwise not appreciate the encounters that they were having because they were already moving far, far down the road.
Yeah. It's like if you took something like Curse of Strahd and from the very beginning you revealed all the ways to beat Strahd, right?
Mhm.
It's too early. You want some payoff down the road. It's fine to give a little
Right.
tip of a vision of an artifact or something, but you want that payoff over time, and the players want that too. They may not quite recognize it, but it plays better that way. And you like mysteries, where it's like sort of like alien horror movies where they don't show you the whole monster right up front because that would just take all
Mhm.
the fun out of it, right? Seeing a
Right.
little, it's the results of its being here,
Mhm.
right? Gets you on
Yeah.
edge. And then there's the
Yeah.
small payoff of more characteristics, right? The acid for blood, the weird goo, right? All that sort of stuff. And then it's the glimpses and then the whole thing. And
Yeah.
and that's
And
that's the whole fun.
And there's two pieces of advice that are seem to be at odds but aren't, right? The one piece of advice is don't give away everything right away. The other piece of advice is give a very specific
Mm,
call to action and first step. And those are two separate things, and you want to balance that. You want to be specific. You need to do this right now in order to
right.
start, but you don't, let the mystery build, as Teo says. Let there be surprises and changes and deepening of the story over time.
Yeah. And that call to action, I mean, sometimes it's overstated. Like I think in Adventures League, sometimes they force the format of it where you have to write what all these
Yeah.
things are and you have to write what all the hooks are. And sometimes it's like, look, you're on a caravan that's just hit by an avalanche. You're going to want to survive. We don't have to
Mhm.
overdo this, folks. Like it's pretty clear
Yeah.
what everybody's motivating factor is. And
Yeah.
sometimes those are the best ways to start with something that's really obvious, right? You're in the tavern, it's under attack. Well, I know what we're all going to do because we all want to live. Like that's not shocking, right? Shocking would be if you say, actually, you want to join the enemies, right? Like, well, that would take some work. But if
Mhm.
it's obvious, let that play out, and you don't have to overthink it. Um, and sometimes that is the most fun approach. And think about whatever your hook is, whatever your impetus for the call to action kind of thing. You know, is there some reason this wouldn't play out, right? Like
Mhm.
if there's a fight in the street and you expect them to back one side, you want to think through and make sure that's what they're really going to do if your story depends on it. And hopefully it doesn't if you're going to leave it ambiguous. But if you really expect everybody to join the bully, well, that needs to be supported by everything you've presented the players with.
For sure. That's a good start. I think it's a good start. I think there's more to talk about here, but
Hmm.
we are out of time. So we're going to talk about that next week. And we are going to say thank you so much, everyone, for your support. Um, for those of you out there who are listeners, thank you. If you have joined our Patreon, thank you so much. Teos is putting on his devil horns while I thank our Master Dungeon supporters. I met many of our Master of Realms supporters and Master of the Multiverse supporters at GameholeCon. So thank you so much, all of those folks who support us. For the Masters of the Multiverse, I'm going to tell thank you to Keith Ammon of The Monsters Know What They're Doing, Lou Anders of Lazy Wolf Studios, Craig Bailey, Steve Bissonette, Merrick Blackman, Evil John, Andy Edmonds at Nerdronomicon, who I definitely said hello to, Nathan Fuller, The Mighty Jerd, Ben Heisler and Paige Lightman, Sean Hurst. I'm sorry I didn't get the chance to meet the little one. Chad Jackson, Brian King, Jim Klingler, aka DM Prime Mover, Chad Lynch, the Mathematician, Eric Mengi, John Mickey, Sean Molly, Falcon Neal, Tom Nelson of the Deck of Player Safety, who I also said hello to at Gary Con, Mike Olson, Mighty Zeus, Post Fiction RPG Audio, Robert Pasley, Vladimir Prenner from Croatia, Chance Russo at Drago Russo, who I said hello to, Ross Sandberg, Andy Shockney, Krishna Simose, Trace, Joe Tyler, James Walton, Graham Ward, Javier Waziak, and Webb Krister. I had to say that wrong because Chris Webster wanted me to mangle his name like we do with Krishna. So I've done that. Chris was at one of my tables. Great player, great time. So thank you to our listeners. If you would like to become a patron of our show, thank you. You can go to patreon.com/masteringdnd. You can also leave us a review either on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to this podcast. That will help spread the joy of Mastering Dungeons. You can also hit subscribe on our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/Mastering Dungeons. If you want your ear holes to please, but also your eye holes as we look at you and speak. So, Teos, where can people find you on social media?
Oh, I wish you could find me at the Duke Blue Devil game, but I just always am afraid that if I go there, I'll jinx it. So instead, you can find me at alphastream.org. All of my creations are found from there. Shawn, where are you hiding?
I am on all the social medias that are important at Shawn Merwin. The podcast is also available at Mastering D&D on all of those places. You could join our community on Patreon as always and ask us questions there. And you can leave us comments or ask questions on our YouTube channel. So we are off. We are starting. We are hooked and we are ready to go on an adventure, Teos. So what should we do now?
Well, I'm going to go to the provision keeper, the store, and go on an extensive shopping session, even though all the other players don't want to go through this.
Yeah, you're gonna have a hard time getting me out of the tavern, Teos. That's all I'm saying.
We're the worst players.
We're terrible.